The Roe v. Wade decision, my beautiful friends, by a majority of 7-2 in 1973, gave women a constitutionally protected right to abortion in the early stages of pregnancy. Now that's gone. And I really want to do 3 things with you. I'm just thinking on the spot because, quite frankly, I turned on the camera planning to talk to you about what it's like to be an opposition leader in Russia, which is continuous with the many conversations we're having. But I just don't think it's right to talk about that before we've said something about this. And let's not conflate this with the Russian politics issues, but of course, this is the sort of decision, the sort of divisiveness, and the sort of backroll of supposed values that these Western societies are proud of, that they'll be celebrating in the Kremlin. But basically, I think I've turned on this phone and I want to talk to you in a kind of a very quick 3-block. I want to say something about how progress gets rolled back. And then I want to say something that is a bit more philosophical, but completely tied to practice and not going into the weeds at all, because there's no time to go into the weeds. And I'll do that with the help of a very great, beautiful colleague of mine, Bernard Williams, who died 20 years ago. And will invoke a radio talk he did in 1977 on abortion. And finally, I'll directly say a sentence or two myself about Roe v. Wade and its reversal. So, I mean, the first thing that's really important that we've already touched on in so many of the videos we've done on the main channel, because notice there's always this theme underneath the surface of human progress, regress, history, whether history is contingent, which is what we think it is on these channels. And, you know, there's always this theme of not just these autocracies we're talking about, but also the fact that these autocracies are a place we don't want to go, and we here are citizens in democracies in strife. But one of the things we've strongly implied repeatedly, is that progress can be reversed. And that is extremely hard for us to come to terms with, because we think, come on, look at the basic rights that we have fairly reasonably established in Western societies. Surely they can't roll back. Well, we're experiencing some rollback now. Surely other rights can't roll back. I mean, let's think. Well, gay marriage. The societies that have it surely can't then back out of it, because it's 2022, and if it's 2022 now, it'll be 2032 later, and that's going to be even more pro, understanding the rights, the needs, the entitlements of everybody in society. No. This stuff gets reversed. That's how history goes. And this raises a very important question for all of us who are thinking about progress, because the typical way, particularly a young person in Western society, thinks today is, okay, I've got a battle for progress. Oh, damn it, everything is stuck. Damn it, everything is corrupt. Damn it, we're making no progress. But actually, you can also go back. And what you're trying to do as a citizen who is committed to your society doing well is keep in mind the fact that we've got to get better, but that even more important than getting better is not getting worse. And sometimes the two are connected. Sometimes trying to get better is the best way of not getting worse. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes you've got to do different things for each. So this is very important. Now, I want to take us very gently into a couple of lines from a radio address by a beautiful man called Bernard Williams. Now, this is not just some kind of random favorite professor of mine. Bernard is probably one of the 3 most talented moral philosophers since the death of Nietzsche. And here, he is not doing anything philosophically complex. He's doing something enormously socially important. He's talking about something enormously socially important, but it's not some kind of high-powered Aristotelian metaphysics that we're going to force-feed ourselves. It's going to be very simple. And I think I'm just going to read a couple of lines, and that's all. And I'll tell you why. Because much of that radio talk, what Bernard was saying was that definitions aren't going to help us with this. And you know all about the definitions, you know? When people start saying that murder is bad, it straight away becomes a conversation about, well, murder of what? Well, murder of a human being. What's a human being? And on that debate proceeds. In fact, the real answer is that you aren't going to have a clearly delineated picture of what's a human being. It's going to be an evolving story. And I am comfortable to say that a new human life in its very early stages after conception is, a human being, but not a formed human being. And that a baby inside the womb late on is more formed, but maybe not fully formed. And that's really enough. And arguing about whether it is or it isn't going to solve the issue. And it's the same with arguments about persons. What's a person? What's not a person? It's even more complicated with persons, because a person requires certain psychological and social and relational characteristics and having complex consciousness, and you can be a human being more than you are a person, potentially. For instance, this could be argued with a human being who is fully adult but very, very severely disabled, let's say severely neurologically disabled, such that they're unable to relate to the world around them. There's no doubt that's a human being, but on some definitions of a person, that's just not gonna, that's not gonna cut, except being on some kind of a scale. So the way these definitions are typically invoked is, in the end, not constructive. And the people who argue that there is no sense at all in which a life in the womb is a person, they run into trouble of having to say that, well, maybe then small children aren't fully persons either. And so that's an absurd direction in which to go. And this definitional stuff is just not going to be helpful. There are then other kind of definitions, and they are definitions about rights, and very often these don't help. And even some of these progressive definitions don't help. I mean, the argument that everything is settled by the fact that a woman has a right to, oversee what goes on with her body. Well, in many forms, that argument doesn't settle everything, because it's not true that a baby inside you is simply a part of your body. And then there are arguments by analogy, which often concede that, yes, maybe a fetus is a person and a human being, but maybe we can somehow, in an amazingly elaborate way, concoct a situation where we can create other examples where it is okay to kill people. It's not going to work. And one of the reasons it's not going to work is because there is nothing like abortion, really. It's a very unique human situation, and it's a very unique situation women go through. So we can throw out a lot of the definitional stuff, and we can throw out much of the right stuff that sort of ties itself to definitional stuff. And now we're getting to this other question that gets raised, and that's whether a liberal policy on abortion somehow create some kind of moral decay in society. And it's at this point that I want to bring in beautiful Bernard Williams. And Bernard ends his radio talk by saying, whether it is actually possible in the long run to have a society that combines full acceptance of liberal abortion institutions with humane attitudes to such things as birth, death, and killing depends in part on whether it is genuinely possible for most people, without either self-deception or brutality, to feel that the killing of a fetus is something basically different from the killing of a separate human being. To feel that, not just to think it. Whether that is possible for most people, I do not claim to know. Yes, you know, Bernard, you do. But there is one significant piece of evidence on the subject that does not seem to often be mentioned. That there is a difference between the death of a fetus in early pregnancy and the death of a separate human being. Here we're arriving to Bernard's conclusion. There is a difference above all. This is a difference above all. And here Bernard is basically speaking words that I could have said, but slightly better. That's why I'm reading him. This is a difference above all in the experience of women. A genuine psychological distinction for most women exists with regard to spontaneous abortion. For most women, to miscarry at 2 or 3 months is not at all the same experience as a stillbirth or an infant dying in its first weeks. And we all know people like that. I know people in all of these categories, and you probably do too. A friend of mine lost 2 infants. And that's a different thing. Yeah, it's a different thing. It's a very, very different thing. It's a very, very different thing to losing a life that's still very much inside you and not close to coming out. And it's even a different thing to a stillbirth. And these are distinctions that are absolutely undeniable and have a kind of universality as well across culture. That requires a bit of elaboration, but I basically think that's true. So there is a difference. And Bernard says, I speak of the emotional or psychological difference, not just of the obvious physical difference, though that itself, no doubt, contributes. If there is that difference with regard to spontaneous abortion, it is no good on the question of induced abortion advancing theories or fears which invoke the consequence that the difference should not exist, that miscarriage and stillbirth should seem the same. Yet many moral theories about abortion do seem to have that consequence. Final short paragraph. This is a point about the experience of women. In the end, this issue can only come back to the experience of women. This is not because their experiences are the only thing that counts. It is because their experiences are the only realistic and honest guide we have to what the unique phenomena of abortion genuinely is, as opposed to what moralists, philosophers, and legislators say it is. It follows that their experience is the only realistic guide to what the deepest consequences will be of our social attitudes to abortion. And I think that's basically it. That a kind of basic understanding of what it's like, which women have, should drive our politics here. Now, you might say, well, wait a second, Vlad. You've read this thing which doesn't mention Roe v. Wade in the bits you read out, and maybe even doesn't mention it at all. What's the relationship, because now it seems like you're saying that these are very complex decisions, the definitions don't work, so why on earth would you want to put this in the hands of a Supreme Court? And that's a tempting direction in which to go, but it's wrong for two obvious reasons. The first is that there is a practical problem with that thought. And the practical problem is that leaving this to state by state by state politics is not going to leave women with the decision to decide, with the possibility to decide in virtue of their conviction, in virtue of their sense of their circumstances, what to do in each case. That's not going to happen. Now, there is also a legal and a logical problem with that thought. And it's this. The Supreme Court is not deciding the religious or the fundamentally meta-ethical or ethical question here. It's not deciding whether a fetus is a human being. It's not deciding whether a fetus is a person. It's deciding whether a fetus is constitutionally a person. And that's exactly the kind of decision that a Supreme Court should make. And it's clear that that's different to a kind of philosophical or religious or some other kind of moralistic conviction on this, because it's completely consistent to think that a fetus is just as much a person and a human being as me and you, but at the same time to think that a fetus is not a person, a human being constitutionally. This is completely consistent, and this is what the Supreme Court should decide. Now that this has happened, what do? There are many things that can be done, but here is the main thing to keep in mind. That the strongest arguments against this are going to be citizen-based arguments and women's rights-based arguments. Far behind, we're going to have class arguments and race arguments. They need to be there too, but they cannot take center stage. You see, you cannot declare this latest decision as some kind of an act of white supremacy, for example, on the logic that all of the different kinds of structural disadvantage are really the same or really connected. That's going to be politically unproductive. And I want to be absolutely clear with you. I am aware not just that in the couple of decades after Roe v. Wade, death from abortion dropped in the United States by 40%. I'm also aware that before Roe v. Wade, if you were a woman in New York and you were black, your chances of dying in abortion were 9 times higher than if you were white. This was a racial justice issue. This was a class issue. And that's not completely gone away at all. So it's important to acknowledge that. But what I am saying is that in the remarkably divisive context of our societies, and in the context of the presence of so much micro-identity politics, the arguments that are going to most emphatically carry the water for us here, as we do these different political battles, as you do them, I'm not in the United States, they're going to be arguments based on we as Americans and we women. And then the other group identity arguments need to come, but they need to be in second place. And the more we can have a sense of civic belonging, a sense of universal citizenship that drives the reaction to this decision, the more likely there's going to be incremental progress and at least a halt to the regress. And if you are waiting for a video on what it's like to be Vladimir Putin's number one enemy and be an opposition politician in Russia, we're going to do that video twice, I think, as a proper video on the main channel, but first as a very casual chat here, maybe in the next day. Thank you so much for taking time. If you're somebody who wanted to go more deeply into the philosophical weeds of an argument like this, then we'll be doing things of that sort on the philosophy channel. Just search Vlad Vexler Philosophy on YouTube, find me there. I can't wait to be back with you very, very soon. Here, the video on the main channel that's coming next is just an idea at the moment, but we're hoping to have it within about a week from now, and I'll keep you updated. Much love, and I'm sorry that history goes with too much contingency. Lots of love.